The Chasm and the Collision by Robert Alessar. Copyright 2017 by Robert Alessar. All rights reserved. Any reproduction of this copyrighted material by any means without the express written consent of the author is strictly prohibited. For Jacob and Kira, all the way. Chapter 1. A Fruitful Day and a Frightful Night. Alex Hinton walked happily home from middle school on a bright day in early spring. The trees along the street had begun to drop their buds as leaves sprouted, giving the neighborhood a mixed canopy of mostly light but increasing darker green. Most of the sidewalks and lawns beneath looked as though they had been dusted with a pale green snow. Alex loved that time of year. It wasn't too hot, but it also wasn't cold, so he could spend a lot of time outdoors. Even better, spring meant that summer was coming soon, which meant that summer vacation was just around the corner. Thinking about that was a bit like thinking about Christmas in late autumn. So heading home from school in that season always put a spring in Alex's step. Alex smirked at his poor private joke, drawing an inquisitive look from the taller boy walking beside him. That was Simon Belmont, Alex's best friend. Simon walked with iPod buds in his ears, but in response to Alex's expression, he took the left bud out. "What's up?" he asked as the two crossed one of the streets that intersected the path to their destination. Alex shook his head dismissively and said, "Nothing. I just thought of something stupid." "Ah," Simon said, and Alex expected no more. Taking both earbuds out now, Simon asked, "So, what do you want to do today? Movie? Game? Kick the can?" Alex snorted a quick laugh. "Kick the can?" he asked. "What the heck is that?" "I don't know," Simon replied. "Some game kids used to play before there was anything better to do." "So what do you want to do?" Alex murmured, only pretending that he didn't already know what he was going to say. "How about Arkham Asylum?" Simon groaned and said, "Oh, man, I don't really want to sit and watch you play Batman." "So you play and I'll watch," Alex suggested, though he knew it was hopeless. Indeed, Simon's next words were, "No, I hate those kind of games. I'd rather do out-and-out fighting than all the sneaky crap." After walking the next several paces in silence, he asked, "You still have any of those God of War games?" Alex shook his head and replied, "Nah, they were my cousin's. Mom won't buy them for me." They walked without speaking for perhaps a dozen yards more before Alex suggested, "Force Unleashed?" Simon's face assumed a thoughtful frown as he appeared to ponder the suggestion deeply. When he responded, it was with the suggestion, "Trade off players after every death?" Smiling, Alex replied, "Sure, what else?" They walked on in silence without any further need to confirm their agreement, along the last complete block before the one on which Alex's house was located. It was an ordinary middle-class neighborhood, with houses side by side, well-tended yards, a few fences here and there, and roads lined with trees, almost all of which were maples. Soon the two friends passed the last cross street and approached Alex's home, which was the fifth before the end of the block. It had a flat facade with the front door in the center, a porch that was only one step up from the walk, and large picture windows on either side of the door. These had extendable awnings, currently pulled back to allow in the early spring sunlight. The large, uncovered windows let Alex see into the ground floor of his home, though his view was slightly impaired by outside reflections. Having this vantage, he stopped short just as he was about to turn into the walkway of the house, and he held out his hand, pulling Simon to his stop as well. "What?" Simon breathed, startled. "Shh," Alex said, though he wasn't sure why he wanted Simon to be quiet. "I just thought I saw something moving inside my house." This was true. As they had drawn even with the front door, Alex had seen what appeared to be the curtains moving in the rear left of the house in what would have been the dining room. "Huh?" Simon said. "Is your mom home already?" Alex shook his head and said, "No, she always parks in the driveway. Besides, there's no lights on. She hates the lights being out when she's at home." "Oh, crap," spat Simon. "Do you think it's a burglar?" Alex paused a moment, not wanting to admit the possibility out loud, but then said, "I don't know. But I only thought I saw the curtain moving. I didn't see anything that seemed like a person in there." Simon's voice trembled as he said, "You guys don't have any new pets or anything, do you? I mean, your mom wouldn't have bought you a surprise dog, would she?" Alex would have laughed if he hadn't been nervous. No, I really don't think so," he said. He took a deep breath and then said, "Well, I guess there's only one way to find out anything for sure." With that, he resumed walking toward the front door. This time it was Simon who grabbed Alex's arm, practically yelling, "What are you doing, man? What if there's a prowler or something in there?" "Well," Alex said, "it's the middle of the day. Not a very good time to rob a house. And I did only see the curtain move. Maybe." "Maybe?" Simon asked. "Do you mean maybe you also saw something else?" "No," Alex replied. "I mean maybe I didn't really see the curtain move. I could have just seen a reflection or something from outside in the window." Simon was clearly not convinced. "I think you should just talk to your neighbors first," he said. "Or maybe call someone." "No," Alex responded, more convinced than before in the face of Simon's hesitance. "No way am I going to freak out my neighbors over something like this, and I'm not going to call the police." He knew that was whom Simon had meant by someone. Perhaps it was reckless, but Alex honestly didn't want to frighten everyone in the street by raising an alarm over something so minor. He'd been watching the front windows, glancing occasionally at the upstairs ones as well, ever since he and Simon had stopped. He had seen no more signs of anything resembling a person or movement. He gently extricated his arm from Simon's grip and walked steadily, though not quite as quickly as usual, toward the front door. Much to his appreciation, he heard Simon following, reluctantly no doubt, just a step or two behind. "I don't know about this," Simon muttered. Alex had all but convinced himself that he must have seen the reflection of something outside and not anything in the house. He was nevertheless just a bit hesitant as he put his key in the lock and turned it. He did it loudly to warn anyone inside and hopefully to encourage them to leave by whatever way they had come in. After unlocking the door, he waited a few extra seconds before slowly pushing it open. It swung wide with an annoying squeak which was drawn out more than usual and which did not improve his mood. It also no doubt made Simon even antsier than he already had been. However, when Alex looked inside, the front hall was all but unoccupied. Its only contents were the stairway up to the second floor and a little wooden table under a wall-mounted mirror on the left side of the hall. Nearer to the door was an opening, not quite an archway, through which Alex could see the family room and beyond it the dining room. Both, like the hallway, were devoid of life. "All clear," Alex reported, with a long exhalation and a significant decrease in tension. Simon, however, was evidently unconvinced. "It's not all clear," he said. "Just the part you can see is clear. What about the rest of the house?" Alex was now quite sure that he had been imagining things, or at least that he had seen something innocent. The relief made him giddy, and he decided to indulge the feeling. "Okay," he said. "Let's check the rest of the house." "What?" Simon began, but before he could so much as finish a single word, Alex sprinted forward and raced up the stairs to the second floor. Upon reaching the top, he turned to the right, opening the door to his parents' room, looking in, and then quickly shutting the door again. Then he went in the other direction, repeating the procedure with his own bedroom, followed by the guest room and the bathroom. As he did, he called out, "Hello? Any burglars? Come out, wherever you are." He knew that he was being silly, but he was embarrassed to have been so frightened and wanted to distract himself from his own chagrin. "Alex," he heard Simon yell, "you're being really stupid." Finding the accusation hilarious, Alex let out a slightly hysterical laugh. Then he thudded back down the stairs, bearing to what was now his left, through another pseudo-arch opposite the entrance to the family room dining room area. "Anyone in the living room?" he asked. Then, moving toward the back of the house, he added, "Anyone in the kitchen?" He stopped briefly and opened the basement door, which was in the kitchen and directly under the upper stairs. Looking down the steps into the lower level, he called out, "Anyone down there?" "Come on, Alex," Simon yelled, still standing just inside the front door. "What is wrong with you?" Alex just laughed again, more forcefully this time, and arrived finally in the left rear of the house, calling out, "And finally, here in the dining room, there is—" He looked around quickly before pronouncing the verdict, "No one." Then he paused for a moment before adding, "But—" "What?" Simon yelled, now stepping fully inside and closing the door behind him. He walked into the family room, heading in Alex's direction. Alex noticed and admired the fact that, despite being frightened, Simon came forward into the house instead of moving away. "But," Alex continued after a deliberate, dramatic pause, "something smells good." Simon, having entered the dining room at a less than graceful but quick pace, stopped short and yelled at his friend, "Aw, you son of a... Hey, something does smell good." It was true. There was a strong, sweet smell in the air, with just a hint of a tart undertone. Alex didn't think it was an air freshener. It smelled too natural. He looked around the room, trying to identify the source of the delightful aroma, and his eyes fell on the large, old-fashioned wooden fruit bowl in the middle of the dining room table. It currently held, as was typical, a few apples, a couple of tangerines, a small group of almost overripe bananas, and something not quite as typical, a cluster of berries resting on top of the other fruit. Alex stared for a moment at the berries. He sniffed the air closely, and though he didn't know quite how he came to the conclusion, he felt sure that the pleasant smell was coming from these small fruits. They were different from any berries he could recall having seen before. They were in a bunch a bit like grapes, though not so haphazard in their growth. In fact, the placement of the berries was almost an arrangement. A single main stalk split into 3 long, thinner stalks, along each of which, at regular intervals, were attached 3 stems, each with a berry at the end. One of the 3 stalks was longer than the other 2, but otherwise the whole pattern had a very nice symmetry to it. The berries themselves were unusual in appearance. They were almost perfectly round, with leaves surrounding the connection between the stem and the fruit, rather like strawberries. In fact, the berries vaguely resembled strawberries, but their color was a darker, slightly purplish red. They had beautifully parallel rows of external seeds, spread evenly in a pattern that looked like dotted latitude lines on a globe. Alex took hold of the main branch and lifted the bunch from the fruit bowl. "Hey, check it out, Simon," he said. "Have you ever seen berries like these before?" The fruits were each about 1.5 inches in diameter, but the stems must have been quite sturdy because the berries didn't sag significantly under their own weight. Simon came close. "No, I don't think so," he said. "Maybe there's some kind of crossbred strawberry? They look a little bit like strawberries." "Yeah, maybe," Alex said. After staring at the fruit for a few more seconds, he decided that one way to learn more about them was to find out how they tasted. He took hold of one and pulled, finding that it easily came loose in his hand, its leaves conveniently left behind with the stem. He brought the berry toward his mouth, but froze when Simon yelled out, "Wait! You shouldn't eat it! You don't even know what it is!" He had not lost his anxious look. "Oh, come on," Alex said with a smile. "My mom wouldn't put any dangerous fruit in the fruit bowl. She's always trying to get me to eat more of it." He then smiled a bit more widely and added, "Unless you think the prowler put it there." "Ha ha, very funny," Simon said. He looked like he was about to add something, but before he could, Alex popped the entire berry into his mouth and bit down. Alex half yelled, half muttered through his full mouth. What? What?" Simon yelled. "Spit it out! Spit it out!" Alex shook his head and, now able to speak a bit more clearly, responded, "Are you kidding? This is the best freaking thing I ever tasted." He didn't think he was exaggerating. When he had bitten into the berry, it had burst in a juicy, pulpy explosion of terrific, delicious sweetness that almost made him shiver. Ordinarily, Alex found that food smelled better than it tasted, but in the case of this berry, it was quite the opposite. He was only a moderate fan of fruit, and he didn't really like it as a snack, though his mother constantly kept it available. But for these berries, he would happily make an exception. "Dude," he said, "you've got to try one of these." Simon had not lost all his skepticism. I don't think so," he said. Alex usually would have pressed his friend as a matter of principle, since he felt that Simon was too hesitant about life. But this time he simply shrugged, saying, "Suit yourself." With that, he took a second fruit off the bunch and popped it into his mouth. It was just as good as the first had been, and though he wanted to savor it, he found that he couldn't control himself. He chewed it quickly and swallowed, then grabbed the third member of the trio from which he had been picking, the one at the top of the second longest stalk. He gulped this third berry into his mouth in short order. Simon finally seemed convinced, and he said, "All right, I'll try one." Alex held the stalk out, and Simon took a berry from the next group down on the same branch from which Alex had chosen his. It was amusing for Alex to watch his friend slowly and hesitantly bring the fruit to his lips, then very slowly take a tiny bite. Once Simon tasted the first morsel, however, his face softened. "Hey," he admitted, "that's not that bad." He put the rest of the fruit into his mouth and began to chew with obvious relish. "Not that bad," Alex repeated. "No, spinach is not that bad." He popped another of the fruits into his mouth. "This one is great." Simon smiled sardonically. "Okay, I don't know what you just said, but don't hog it all, okay?" Alex laughed, almost drooling fruit juice down his face. "Sorry, man," he said finally, when he had swallowed his mouthful and started to hold out the bunch of berries so that Simon could take another one. Then he noticed something through the front window, this time something outside of his house, that distracted him. "Hang on," he said, walking briskly away, leaving Simon thwarted in the middle of reaching for another berry. "Hey, what?" Simon began, watching in bemusement as his friend strode past him. Alex had seen someone moving along the sidewalk out front, and that someone was always able to catch his attention, though he was far from sure that he ever caught hers very well. Still, he had a tolerable excuse to make conversation now, and he was going to use it. Rushing to his front door, Alex opened it wide and called out, "Hey, Megan!" Just passing the path to Alex's front door was one of his classmates, Megan Tavis. This was pronounced Tavis, as she always had to point out to new teachers and substitutes. She probably would need to perform that clarification for the rest of her life, Alex imagined, unless she got married and changed her name, to Hinton, for example. That was a much simpler name. Alex had a crush on Megan in the worst way, but unfortunately she always seemed too shy and quiet to say much, even when he had the courage to talk to her. Megan stopped short and looked up as Alex came walking toward the main sidewalk. She looked both startled and puzzled. Megan had shoulder-length, dark auburn hair, was thin, and was about the same height as Alex. As she watched Alex approach, she seemed to catch up with what was happening. "Oh, hi, Alex," she said. "I didn't know you lived here." "Yep," Alex replied, with what he could only hope was a convincing smile, since he was internally devastated that Megan had to struggle to remember his name. "Are you just on your way home from school?" Yeah, I am. I had to go over something with a teacher before I left, so I'm running a little late." "Oh, okay," Alex responded. As so often happened, he found himself with absolutely nothing intelligent to say when Megan was in front of him, and he began to feel awkward. Then he recalled what had brought him outside in the first place. "Oh, hey, I wanted to ask you," he said. "You know what kind of berries these are?" He had been moving at what he hoped was a cool, relaxed saunter, and was now only a few feet away from her. As he asked his question, he held the triple stalk aloft for her to examine. Megan, still clearly puzzled, took a quick look at the fruit, and Alex was absurdly pleased to have caught her attention so well. Then, abruptly, that pleasure was interrupted as Megan looked past Alex's shoulder and said with a smile, "Hi, Simon, how's it going?" Alex, surprised in turn, quickly looked over his shoulder and saw that Simon had come to the front door, which Alex had left open. Simon and Megan had known each other practically since preschool, and their families were somewhat close, so while Megan was shy with most people, she was always completely comfortable with Simon. This habitually caused Alex to feel just a bit of hostility toward his best friend. Simon waved briefly back at Megan, replying, "Hi, Megan, I'm good. How's it going with you?" Megan smiled again and answered, "Good. How about you?" Then her eyes widened and she blushed, apparently realizing that she had repeated herself. Alex, trying to distract Megan from her embarrassment as well as to rejoin the conversation, asked, "So, do you know what they are?" He gently shook the berries to remind her. Megan lowered her gaze, looking closely at the fruit, but she answered, "No, I don't think so. What are they called?" Alex shrugged. "I don't have any idea, but they sure taste great." Megan peered at him almost suspiciously, as if she suspected him of setting her up for some practical joke. "It's true," Alex assured her, smiling, though a bit crushed that she didn't trust him. "You should try one." Now looking even more suspicious, Megan began to reply, "I don't know." Alex was going to try to convince her, but before he could, Simon's voice came from behind him, saying, "Don't worry, Megan, he's not messing with you. They really do taste good." The suspicion vanished instantly from Megan's face, which again led Alex to feel jealous of his friend. Nevertheless, he happily held the fruit out to Megan so she could pick off a berry. It came free for her just as readily as the ones that Alex and Simon had eaten, and she brought it to her mouth, biting it in half. "Mmm!" she exclaimed, wiping a bit of purple juice from her lips as she chewed. Then she swallowed and continued, "It really is good." She put the rest of the berry into her mouth. Apparently some of her shyness had been banished by the flavor, because she spoke unabashedly with her mouth full, asking, "Where did you get these?" Alex, grinning at her reaction and at the fact that the ice was well and truly broken, replied, "I don't know. My mom got them and put them out in the fruit bowl." "Wow," Megan breathed with wide eyes. "That tastes amazing." Feeling as inspired and giddy as he had upon finding his house safely empty, Alex proffered the branch to Megan again and suggested, "Here, take some with you." Megan looked stunned by the offer, a fact which led Alex to wonder just what sort of behavior she might have been expecting. "Are you serious?" she asked. Alex found himself almost sad that she was so hesitant. There was something about the way she asked that made him suspect that someone had been very unkind to her in the past. "Of course," he replied. "Take one of the branches. Or do you want to come in and hang out with us?" He pointed a thumb over his shoulder and passed Simon, who had come closer, toward the front door, which had been left open. "Oh," Megan stammered, suddenly looking shy again. "I can't come in now. I've got to get home." But she hesitantly reached out toward the fruit, then stopped before taking hold of any more of the berries and asked, "Are you sure?" "Of course," Alex said with a laugh that he hoped was encouraging and that she wouldn't perceive as derogatory. "I wouldn't offer it otherwise." "Wow, thanks," Megan said with a smile. She reached out only a little less hesitantly and carefully pulled free about 2/3 of the smallest branch, leaving 6 berries still on the stem. Alex blinked. "Is that all you want?" he asked. "You can have more, you know." Megan nodded with an awkward smile. "Yeah, I just want a few. I'm not supposed to eat between meals, so I don't want to take more than I can eat on the rest of the way home." "Oh," Alex responded, once again surprised and puzzled. Why would someone so thin need to worry about eating between meals? Well, it wasn't his business, though he was certainly curious. He decided not to press the issue, instead saying, "Okay. Well, anyway, enjoy." "Thanks," Megan said, with another somewhat more comfortable smile. She seemed to take that exchange as a final one, because she started walking forward again, waving as she did and saying, "Bye, Simon. Bye, Alex." "Bye, Megan," Simon answered. "See you later." Alex, deeply mortified that Megan had again had trouble remembering his name, was briefly struck mute. He caught himself before she had passed more than a few feet beyond the end of his house's property line and called out, "Bye, Megan. Hey, if I get some more of these tomorrow, I'll make sure to save some for you." Megan, apparently in the process of eating another berry, waved with a glance over her shoulder and said, "Fruitful," which Alex was almost certain was meant to be thanks. Alex gazed after her, picking another berry, this time from the longest of the branches, and popping it in his mouth. All right, Simon spoke up. "I'm still waiting. Simon says give me that second stalk there." He pointed toward the branch from which they had already been eating, indicating that he was leaving the longest stalk for Alex, even though Alex had already eaten 3 berries from the shorter one. Alex, recognizing that this was unfair, asked, "Are you sure you want the smaller one?" Simon nodded. "Yeah, I'm sure. They're good, but I think you like them more than I do." So saying, Simon reached out and pulled loose the branch that he had indicated. Alex was left with the longest stem and the remnant of the stem from which Megan had chosen her portion. He had to admit that, though it was unfair, he was delighted. "Hey, thanks, man," he said, as he and Simon walked back toward the house. As they reached the door, he took a berry from his share and, before he put it in his mouth, said, "Just for that, you get to be first to play Force Unleashed." And, he added quickly, recognizing that Simon would no doubt protest that this was a meager offer of compensation, "and you get to play 2 deaths for every one of mine." Simon paused briefly, and then he said, "Fine, that'll do." Alex put the berry in his mouth as they entered the house and closed the front door behind him. He locked it reflexively, barely giving a thought to the disturbance earlier, and of course never giving any serious consideration to whether the berries could be connected with it. In fact, he wouldn't entertain any such possible link for quite some time. That would be long after he had voraciously eaten every morsel in his share of the bunch, as well as one more from Simon's, with permission, and all the berries were gone, their matter becoming part of his body and, to a lesser degree, the bodies of Simon and Megan. By the time his mother, and later his father, came home for the evening, the berries had slipped Alex's mind. He and Simon played video games for a few hours after their brief conversation with Megan. Then they did Alex's mother a somewhat grudging favor when she got home by raking up the tree buds in the front yard and bagging them to be put out for the garbage. After that, Simon left, and Alex ate dinner with his mother. His father worked late a good percentage of the time and often didn't get home until after nightfall, just before Alex was ready to go to bed. That night Mr. Hinton arrived a bit earlier than usual, but still had to eat a separate meal, though he did have company. Alex did his small amount of homework seated at the table and half listening to the conversation between his father and mother, but rarely adding anything. Then, when he was finished with his assignments, he went upstairs, brushed his teeth, and went to his room. He lay in bed reading for a while until his mother opened the door and said, "Lights out now, Alex." Alex, more than a little tired in any case, did not feel like arguing the point. He closed his book and put it on the bedside table, saying, "Okay, Mom. Good night." His mother shut off the room light. "Good night," she said. "Have a good sleep." She began to close the door gradually, but before she finished, Alex quickly called out to her. "Oh, hey, Mom," he said. "That fruit today was great. You should get more of that." His mother looked briefly puzzled, but she smiled and replied, "Well, that's good to hear. I'll try to do that." "Cool," Alex said as his mother finished closing the door. He felt very satiated both from dinner and from his welcome afternoon snack, and he easily and quickly dropped off to sleep. After a brief period of simple darkness, he found himself drifting in a slowly developing but vivid dream. In it he felt that he was rising from the ground and floating into a clear nighttime sky. He experienced a distinct and pleasant warmth spreading from his center to his limbs and up to his head. As the sensation reached his eyes, the scene beneath and around him began to change. The blue-black sky gradually shifted in color, taking on a reddish-orange hue, almost like that of a vivid sunset, but with its light more uniform and diffuse than normal, the redness not localized in any direction but spread broadly from horizon to horizon. There were many wisps of cloud, all with a reddish-purple hue reminiscent of the color of the berries Alex had eaten earlier. In his dream, Alex blinked as he suddenly realized that he was perceiving more than one image at the same time. He could still see the normal, starry nighttime with which the dream had begun, but he found that he could, at the same time, also see the sunset-colored sky superimposed on the normal one. What was more, he found that he could focus on one or the other impression as he chose. He turned his gaze downward, and beneath him saw another overlapping set of images. One version of the view was of his house, yard, and the surrounding neighborhood, stretching out as expected toward the rest of the city. It was nighttime, so the scene was lit only by street lamps and yard lights, but it was clearly visible. Behind or beneath that tableau was a much less usual landscape, some of which was colored with blue-green vegetation, while most consisted of rocky, craggy ground, just a bit browner and darker in shade than the color of the second sky. Looking off now into the distance, Alex saw that the landscape, the unfamiliar one, abruptly came to an end, dropping away into the unseen at a precipitous edge, like the rim of a mind-bogglingly gigantic canyon. He could discern no far side to the chasm, nor could he make out any hint of a bottom. There was only more sky, going down as far as the eye could see, with slightly brighter light farther down. While marveling at this unnatural scenery, Alex came to the realization that he had begun to move, and soon he found himself floating toward, and then along, the edge of the immense precipice. Even from along the edges there was no sign of a bottom, just the red-orange color going on to infinity, as if this cliff were a place where the edge of the world had broken off, leaving nothing beyond but sky. Ahead in the distance, far along the drop-off, he began to make out what at first looked like a strange outcropping of rock. As he moved toward it, getting slowly but steadily closer, and as it grew in his sight, he understood that it was not merely an outcropping or a projection from the cliff, but was in fact a gigantic fortress, somehow carved from rock that matched the color of the ground. He was further astounded to see that the shape appeared to be connected to the main cliff face only by a single narrow strip, like a bridge of rock, and otherwise hung in the air above the precipice, to which there was still no discernible bottom. As Alex continued to draw nearer to the edifice, he realized that it must be bigger than any normal building he had ever seen. In fact, it was bigger than a city block. No, it was bigger than most cities of which he knew. It had spires and turrets and more bizarrely shaped outcroppings and protrusions, as well as numerous scattered doorways and windows. Below, extending from the bottom of the gigantic structure, was what appeared to be a very large inverted tower. At the lowest end of that hung a bulbous cylinder more than twice as wide as the projection to which it was attached. This appeared to be the lowest point of the gargantuan shape. It was, however, soon lost from Alex's sight, for as he floated forward, he began to rise above the megalith and could only see it from the top. The structure was irregular and multi-layered, like a city built on and around a high mountain top, with spikes and towers that looked more like natural formations than works of craft. Roughly in the middle of the whole expanse was a sharp, tall tower with a balcony and courtyard protruding from its edge near the apex. The balcony at first seemed quite small, but suddenly Alex began to swoop down toward it at what he could tell was tremendous speed, faster than any normal falling velocity, and the terrace only slowly grew larger. As it did, Alex realized that the seemingly small projection must easily have had a greater area than the entire grounds of his middle school. Alex plummeted ever faster toward the balcony. He saw that it was dominated by a cultivated area, a garden of sorts, with many bushes and trees and flowers arranged throughout. In the center was a raised pedestal from which grew a large bush or a small tree. It was toward this pedestal and the plant growing on it that he accelerated. As he raced downward, he got close enough to the tower and the balcony for perspective and sound to make him truly feel the effects of his descent, and for the first time he experienced a surge of fear. The ground on the balcony below him grew closer and closer, rushing toward him more and more quickly. He passed the peak of the tower. The circle in the center of the garden now filled his vision, and he could all but feel on the surface of his skin that he was about to rush into it with an impact that would surely shatter every bone in his body. The tree was only a few feet away. There was no avoiding it. Then, suddenly, Alex woke up. Despite the cliché, Alex didn't sit bolt upright in bed. Instead, his eyes popped open and he stared around himself in the dark of his own bedroom. It seemed brighter than usual, as though it were nearly dawn, but when he looked at his clock, he saw that the time was only about 2:30 in the morning. "Whoa," he muttered to himself, "that was a weird dream." Before he could begin to clear his head and try to go back to sleep, Alex's puzzled thoughts were interrupted by a strange noise that came from outside. It was something between a croak and a shriek, hoarse and lower than any bird sound or other local animal that Alex could recall hearing. It seemed quite some distance away, and it lasted several seconds before it stopped. Then, a moment later, it started again. This time it seemed louder than before, and the volume increased as the sound persisted. Whatever was making the noise was coming closer. Now Alex did sit up in bed, wondering what in the world the sound was and what could be making it. He couldn't quite understand why, but it carried a disquieting undertone of pain, and he also thought of hunger. It was deeply unnerving to have such impressions. It was also more than a bit frightening. Rising from bed, Alex went to his window. He almost always left the drapes open. Tonight was no exception. After walking the few necessary steps, he looked outside, though far from sure that he really wanted to see the cause of the noise. The ground below was brightly lit, though the moon was only a quarter full. In his own yard, Alex could make out only the well-tended grass and the few flowers in his mother's small garden by the garage. There was no sign of any living creature, ordinary or otherwise. The noise began again, significantly closer, once more lasting several seconds and then stopping. More disquieting was Alex's realization that it was coming not from anywhere below his second-story room level, but from above, like the sound of something flying. Alex's mind flashed back to his recent dream experience, and with the combination of that memory and of the sound, he almost felt as though he were still moving through the air himself. Turning his gaze upward, he was at least relieved to see only a normal nighttime sky, bluish-black and sprinkled with stars, with the moon lowering toward the tree line and a few minor wisps of cloud. He scanned the sky above his yard and beyond, but could discern nothing unusual. What could be making that noise? As if in response to Alex's curiosity, the call came again, much louder than before, and this time it seemed to come from directly above his house. Alex flinched and ducked when he heard the noise drop in pitch as it passed overhead. Then, looking back outside, he saw something that made him reel back from the window. A huge shadow, bigger than any bird Alex had ever heard of, passed over his house. It was shaped almost like a manta ray. Alex had seen pictures of the gigantic ocean creatures, and those were what immediately sprang to his mind. But this shape was in the sky. It had wings that spread from its entire body length, but they were squared off at the ends, not triangular like a ray's would have been, and it had a long tail that tapered out behind it as it flew directly over Alex and out away from his house. It couldn't have been more than 100 feet up in the air, and though Alex wasn't sure exactly how big it was certainly very large. Was this still a dream? Alex looked quickly at his surroundings. Though fear seemed to make everything sharper and clearer than usual, the scene appeared normal. The only alien presence was the monstrous thing in the sky. Watching the trailing form, Alex was astonished and horrified to see that, before it went far past his yard, it began to turn. He couldn't make out any detailed features, but he thought he saw a claw of some kind stretching out to the side underneath it as it banked. He knew somehow, perhaps from the way it arced and the sharpness of its curve, that the creature was about to head back in the direction from which it had come, directly toward his house. He wasn't sure if it was just a coincidence, but some part of him felt as if the thing were looking for him, hunting for him. He was also quite certain that he did not want it to find him. He rushed to pull his curtains closed before the thing in the sky could complete its course reversal. He barely made it in time, and he half imagined he could see a horrifying face coming into view on the front of the creature before it was cut off from sight by the thin cloth. Once the drapes were closed, Alex ducked down onto the floor below the window level, not quite trusting the fragile curtains to hide him. The alien sound ripped forth again, higher in pitch now and louder, headed back toward the house. Alex clamped his eyes shut as though warding off a nightmare, half expecting the sky-born creature to come crashing through both window and wall, straight into his bedroom. It did not. Instead, the noise passed overhead again. Alex was only too happy to hear its sound drop in pitch once more as it receded, pausing and then repeating, shrinking more, and then finally fading completely from his hearing. When the sound had been gone for what was probably at least 3 minutes, Alex rose unsteadily to his feet. As his fear calmed a bit, it occurred to him that his parents surely must have been awakened by the noise. He went to his bedroom door and opened it, but looking and listening in the upstairs hallway revealed no evidence that anyone else was stirring. He walked slowly to his parents' closed bedroom door and put his ear to the panel. From the other side, he could clearly hear his father's moderate snoring and even his mother's slightly higher-pitched breathing. They were both sound asleep. Alex was dumbfounded. How could they not have heard that horrible noise? How could it not have awakened them? Certainly they were adults and not as prone to be panicked by nighttime sounds as he might be, but he couldn't see how they would not have been startled and frightened. If they had seen it... Well, in any case, he just couldn't understand how they had slept through the whole thing. He felt a powerful urge to rush into his parents' room and crawl into bed between them as if he were still 5 years old. What was the thing that he had seen? He had never even heard of such a flying creature, never seen a picture nor watched a nature show that had mentioned such a beast. That last thought made Alex stop himself just as he was about to open the door and wake his parents. He realized that there surely couldn't be any such creature. He would have heard of it at the very least. Had he been still dreaming then when he saw it? It hadn't felt like a dream. It had felt horrifyingly intense, and the sound itself had been almost palpable, especially when the thing had turned back toward the house. Yet maybe that intensity was a sign that the thing wasn't something real, but was a leftover from his earlier vision. Alex had heard somewhere that when someone had an intense nightmare, it could sometimes continue for a while even after they woke up. The fear in his dream, though, the falling sensation and the expectation of impact at the end, had been a quick, entirely visceral and swiftly fading feeling. It had the character of startlement more than of truly being frightened. On the other hand, whatever it had been that he had heard and seen after the dream, that had been truly terrifying, like an encounter with something genuinely dangerous. Still, it couldn't be real. There was no such animal. Could it have been some kind of optical illusion? Could it really have been a normal bird, perhaps a big one, that his recently dreaming imagination had magnified into a monster? What about the sound? He had never heard anything remotely like it. Could that also have been the product of overstimulated imagination? What else could it be? Alex still found himself almost desperately wanting to go in and wake his parents so that he could tell them about what he had seen and heard. But they both had to get up early in the morning, and so did he. Also, he couldn't quite stomach the embarrassment of talking to them about it, especially now that his immediate animal fear had begun to dissipate. He was 12 years old and would be 13 before the beginning of the next school year, a full-fledged teenager. Teenage boys, and immediately pre-teenage ones, did not run into their parents' bedrooms because of bad dreams. If he did that, he would always have to fear its revelation to some friend or relative in the future. Worst of all, he would have to remember it himself. Sighing, he pulled his hand away from the doorknob and slowly, and a bit miserably, walked back to his own room, crawling despondently back into bed. He did not, however, reopen his curtains. It took him an unusually long time to get back to sleep, but he had no further dreams, and if the night was disturbed by any more cries from improbable flying creatures, they did not become loud enough to awaken him.